This is Nate McGaha. I'm the Executive Director of Arts North Carolina, and this video is Advocacy 101. This is going to cover the basics of arts advocacy and also let you know a little bit more about Arts North Carolina, who we are, and what we do. So, Arts North Carolina has a mission of uniting people and communities to strengthen and celebrate a creative North Carolina, and a vision of a vibrant North Carolina where the arts are embraced by all is indispensable. Well, but what does that mean we do on a regular day to day basis? So we work for public funding and policy for primarily nonprofit arts organizations, but also for the larger creative economy. And we also work for public funding and policy for comprehensive arts education. And we do that in a lot of different ways that I'll talk about more in a minute. Now, Arts North Carolina is a 501c3 nonprofit organization, and we are North Carolina's only statewide arts advocacy organization. Now, I'm a firm believer that if you want to know about an organization's priorities and mission and how it accomplishes that, you have to understand where its money comes from. We are primarily funded through memberships. About 40% of our funding comes from organization memberships, which are largely nonprofit arts organizations. Another 20% of our funding comes from individual donors or individual memberships. We also get funding from the Creative State license plate. I hope that you've seen them out on the roads of North Carolina. The Arts Plate is a really great way to show your support for the arts. It's $30 a year to have one that you pay with your vehicle registration. $10 of that the state takes for the nefarious purpose of putting wildflowers on the side of the road. The other $20 comes to Arts North Carolina, and we use that funding to pay for our lobbyist at the North Carolina General Assembly. And the last bit of our revenue comes from Arts Day, which is our annual conference of arts and action, bringing the arts community across the state together, but also creating opportunities and for arts advocates from around the state to connect with their elected officials at the North Carolina General Assembly. Now, there's two terms that we use quite a bit, both advocacy and lobbying, and they're not exactly the same thing, but they are very closely related. Advocacy is active support for a cause or an idea or a policy, like arts education is good for students. Our schools need arts education. Arts education helps support good citizens and well-rounded people in our community. Whereas lobbying is an action to advance money or policy. So lobbying is much more specific action, such as arts education in our school district needs $10 million in funding. So you can see that both advocacy and lobbying are going to be needed in order to achieve our goals, but when they should be done together, and they should be done strategically, and they should be done intentionally at the right time with the right message. So at Arts North Carolina, we find lots of ways to make both advocacy and lobbying work together. Our grassroots work is certainly kind of the cornerstone of our success. And that's just connecting individuals to their elected officials and helping them to have the information and the messaging that they need to be most effective and the tools they need to be successful in those conversations with elected officials, is whether that's on phone or via email or face-to-face communication. We have a network of hundreds of arts organizations across the state, as well as thousands of advocates that we connect to through our email list that if you're not signed up for, I encourage you to sign up at artsnc.org. As I mentioned before, we do hire a professional lobbyist that we have at the North Carolina General Assembly, Ken Melton and Associates. In addition to Ken, we've got Stephen Kuba, who's sort of our point man in the hallways there in the North Carolina General Assembly, and Andy Chase, who is always keeping an eye on policy for us. So there's always somebody keeping an eye on arts and arts education issues at the North Carolina General Assembly. And finally, election engagement. And we engage in elections in a variety of ways. Certainly candidate surveys we do for the General Assembly. Questionnaires that we put out to gauge their knowledge and interest in arts programs and supporting those arts programs either through policy or funding. We also provide resources for voters so that folks know how to find their polling place or how to make their vote count. We also do work with nonprofit organizations, making sure that they know the best way that nonprofit arts organizations can engage in the election process. So I talked a little bit about our support for comprehensive arts education, but dive into what that really means. Comprehensive arts education we look at as part of a three-legged stool, or the three pieces on the pie chart there. Arts education certainly is what you think it means: instruction in an essential art subject, such as learning how to draw, learning how to dance, learning theater arts, or learning a musical instrument or chorus, actual instruction, hands-on instruction in the arts. Then there's arts exposure, which is essential to a fully developed arts education. And that's exposure to quality arts experiences, such as going to a symphony or going to a museum, or having those experiences come to the classroom or come to the school building. Many of our nonprofit arts organizations provide arts education and some level of arts exposure to our students throughout the state. And then finally, arts integration, which is using arts as a catalyst and a tool for learning across the curriculum. And when I'm trying to explain this to a legislator that's not familiar with the term, I would say, you learned your alphabet to a song by Mozart. So why not expand that and have elementary school learn how the solar system works through a creative movement workshop, and so on. And really recognizing that children learn and we all learn in different ways, and the arts stimulate parts of our brain that we're just now beginning to understand. So, talking a little bit about how Arts North Carolina affects the budgeting process. Uh, Arts North Carolina is an advocacy organization, and a lot of our work is spent advocating to the North Carolina General Assembly. Um, and the budget side, we're usually asking for funding for the North Carolina Arts Council grants programs. Right now, annually, they distribute about 6.3 to $6.5 million in grants that go out to all 100 counties of North Carolina, helping them to stay artsy. Now, we also work with our national partner, Americans for the Arts, which is the national arts advocacy organization. Together, we lobby and advocate to the United States Congress, particularly through our congressmen and women and senators in the United States Congress, primarily for funding for the National Endowment for the Arts. Though we also talk a lot about the National Endowment for the Humanities, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, Institute of Museum and Library Services, and other national programs that are funded that are in support of the arts and humanities. Now, about $900,000 to $1 million each year comes from the National Endowment to the Arts to the North Carolina Arts Council, which then is in turn distributed in grants and programming out to the entire state of North Carolina. Then about $500,000 to $1 million each year comes from the National Endowment Arts into individual project grants for organizations across North Carolina as well. So we see about $1.5 to $1.9 million coming from the NEA each year into the state of North Carolina. But as COVID-19 hit in the spring of 2020, we really saw the work that we do expand in some severe and quick ways, broadening the umbrella of what we do, both in the service to the arts industry and arts education industry, but also, of course, in the advocacy realm as well. In service, we quickly launched right out of the gate the Resource and Action Center. So there would be a one-stop page where you could find all of the resources that you needed to navigate the pandemic, from funding and new legislation, et cetera, as well as all of the actions that were going to need to be taken and that still need to be taken in order to connect with elected officials at both the state and federal level. Our next step was we're launching the Relief Funds and Grants for Artists in the Arts page. So we created a one-stop shop where local and state level as well as national level relief funds that were being set up, particularly in those early days, and then grant programs that were coming out to address pandemic related needs, so that there would really be one place where the arts industry and individual artists in North Carolina could find all of those resources and funds that they needed. We greatly increased our training and information programs. Certainly, we sent out more blog posts than we ever had before, doubled and sometimes tripled the amount of emails that we were getting out because there was just so much information, and created a whole new webinar series with Webinar Wednesdays that almost always happens on Wednesdays, covering topics from advocacy as well as federal loans, updates on what's going on, fundraising in a pandemic, and really whatever topics and information we could find that we knew was going to be of value to the arts field. We also worked steadily on reopening the arts and arts education, providing services such as our Open Arts resource page, which really has a wide variety of resources and links to programs, both from the arts industry, from the arts education industry, also from government sources, and some legal resources as well. Really trying to help all of our arts community to navigate through what the reopening process is looking like now and what it's going to look like in the future, and providing the resources they need. We then partnered with the North Carolina Arts Council, as well as the North Carolina Theater Conference and the North Carolina Presenters Consortium, to create the guide to reopening the arts in North Carolina. So really a quick guide of useful information as we reopen and what was going to be necessary to get our arts industry reopened. Quickly after that, we pivoted and worked with the Arts Education Leadership Coalition, made up of arts leaders and arts educators from all around the state. And this research and these recommendations have actually since become linked to the official guidance of the state of North Carolina Department of Public Instruction and the State Board of Education, really providing those resources and, well, recommendations for all arts education as North Carolina is reopening school to in-person instruction. It's still a very valuable resource several months later. And then, of course, there was Silver Lining Stories, which was a platform that we created so that folks from all over the state could share some more inspiring stories about how they were coping with the pandemic. Everything from art galleries being set up in driveways to costume shops being turned into mask making shops. So it was a really great way for us to share our successes and to inspire others with some really great ideas. On the advocacy front, we've certainly been engaging with the United States Congress, both in the House and the Senate, with putting out regular calls of action and connecting folks to their representative, and also taking a lot of direct meetings with our representatives, Congress, and their staffers and advisors. We've been continuing our work with the North Carolina General Assembly, of course, with calls of actions and making connections, taking those direct meetings, and the valuable and continued work of our lobbyists. On the local advocacy level, we've been consulting with local arts leaders about accessing federal dollars and state dollars, training, and providing all of those resources and data points and information necessary for arts advocates to have that impact at the local level. In terms of reopening both arts and school, we've been in communication with the governor's office on a regular basis, as well as the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services, as they kind of create those guidelines and begin to reopen. We're helping to inform that conversation. And finally, with reopening schools, making sure that every superintendent and every local arts coordinator had the recommendations for arts education as North Carolina reopened schools in their hand early in the summer, so that as plans were created, and as plans are still being created about in-person instruction, that we have a piece that not only talks about what is needed to safely reopen schools, but also talks about the need for arts education in our schools, particularly at this crucial moment. So I want to dive into a little bit of the methodology of advocacy. There's several ways to advocate for the arts, or really for any topic, and one sort of builds on the other. Grassroots advocacy is, the letter writing, the email writing, maybe making the phone calls at the appropriate time, going to a public comment section on a website, really making your voice heard. Laying out your thoughts and your case in an email or a letter can be a good way to organize your thoughts, and a really good way to make your case and to go on record in support of the things that are most valuable to you. Um, in this grassroots level work, it's really important too to have alliances. Arts North Carolina is certainly one, as well as Americans for the Arts for the state and national stuff. But I encourage everyone to reach out to their local arts council, which is usually the hub of advocacy work within each individual community, usually on a county-based structure. But what we're going to talk more about today is relationship building, sometimes called grass tops advocacy. And that's that meetings with decision makers, right? Meeting with those elected officials that can really make change. Certainly now we're having a lot of these conversations via phone or video because we live in a socially distant world, but that doesn't make it any less important. Now, certainly there's some opportunities to do that. We have Arts Day that we do every year here in North Carolina to connect people with the General Assembly. And then, Americans for the Arts also has the National Arts Action Summit, which will be digital this year. So both of those are going to go digital, but both very important events so that you can do this work as a group. But you can take those individual meetings as well. And I'm going to talk a little bit more, but these meetings can really sort of be summed up in a sharing of your story, educating and explaining, and then making that ask for the arts, right? And it's really a simple formula that it can be applied to almost every meeting you have, as long as you put that all in an envelope of gratitude, really a positive attitude and an attitude of gratitude is something that's going to be useful as you have these conversations, and to have them in a nonpartisan way, not bipartisan talking about left and right, but just nonpartisan, because the arts are really for everyone, completely devoid of politics. Now, the last step is sort of public awareness. This is getting your message out to a much broader step. And I'm not going to talk too much more about this, but just public awareness kind of covers, getting your word out on social media and email lists. I encourage everyone to do that. Maybe spread the word and the calls to action within your own networks. You can also hold celebrations and events, not unlike Arts Day, but you can always have, events at your local school that highlight arts education and make sure that your local school board members are aware. Also, you can access print and online publications, as well as both radio and TV news. That media is a great way to get your word out. Marches and protests, I generally steer people away from doing for the arts because it can be misconstrued as being angry, and it's also a little bit more difficult to control when there's a lot of people standing outside holding signs. So you got to be really cautious about that, and really cautious about any time that you step into public awareness, because once you get into the public sphere, whether or not it's on Facebook or on the streets, it's you can make a lot of friends very quickly, but you can also make enemies quickly. So you have to be that much more cautious about what you're saying and who you're saying it to. Now, I said we'd dive in a little bit more to the share, educate, and ask. And, I think it's important that every time that you're having a conversation with an elected official, or really anybody that you're trying to sway to your side, that you have some kind of narrative, some kind of story. And I like to talk about little Johnny as a good example, right? So we'll say that we're going to tell a story about little Johnny, and maybe little Johnny had a lot of struggles, right? Had a lot of challenges. Maybe he was socioeconomically challenged, or came from a background that didn't necessarily set him up for success. But little Johnny found himself getting involved in music education, right? And so once he got involved in music education, his grades came up. He got more engaged in school. His attendance improved. And little Johnny actually ended up going through high school and going through college and becoming a very successful, I don't know, maybe he was a lawyer, or maybe he was the mayor of your town, or maybe he ended up being a concert pianist. But maybe there's a success story there about little Johnny. And politicians like this because they can connect to little Johnny, and they can remember that there's a story there that has an emotional connection. They create a face in their head. But then how do we take that to the next level? And this is where the educate and explain phase comes in, where we use research and data that we might have to build out our case, right? To take our story and make it everyone's story. And, in the case of little Johnny, right? Like we've heard this wonderfully touching story about how little Johnny was successful because of his involvement in music. But if we also then say that the most socioeconomically challenged students in our school systems are 5 times more likely to graduate from high school and twice as likely to graduate from college if they're actively engaged in arts education throughout all of high school. Now we've made little Johnny into every Johnny and every Jane. And now we're connecting to the larger constituency of that decision maker. And that's how we make that case. And then probably, the most important part of that meeting is to remember to make that ask, right? I mean, we're talking about little Johnny, maybe we're asking for more funding for a school system. It's important that you know exactly what your ask is before you're having the conversation, and you have your facts and figures ready to support that ask as well. Even if the ask is to continue the conversation at a later date, it's just always important to have some sort of ask at the end of your meeting. So as we're meeting with our elected officials, the first thing is scheduling that meeting, right? Like that's the most obvious thing. You got to be meeting with the right person. Obviously, you don't want to be talking to a city official about increasing county funding for the arts. So making sure that you're having a conversation with the correct official to address the issue that you want to address. In terms of when to meet, there's no wrong time to meet. It's always a good time to meet with your elected official, but be strategic about it too. So almost at every level of government, particularly at the state and local level, budget decisions are finalized and made in the spring. So that's a great time to check in with your elected official. But oftentimes before that, you can find some more time to have a longer conversation and a more detailed conversation and really make your case more in depth. I always like to compare it to either pumpkin spice or the peppermint lattes at Starbucks. When you see those pumpkin spice lattes come out, now is a really good time to maybe sit down and have a cup of coffee with your legislator, maybe in their home district, and to have a conversation about the importance of the arts. Though in an election year, I usually tell people to wait until after the election because they're very busy running for office, and have the conversation with them maybe in late November or December over something a little bit more holiday flavored. How to schedule? It's just like scheduling any appointment, but you need to stay polite and persistent. I know at the North Carolina General Assembly and in a lot of county and city government as well, they're very, very busy. So you might need to send several emails or follow up with a few phone calls before you get that meeting. But always make sure that you're staying polite while you're being persistent, because you want to, whoever you're dealing with, whether or not it's the actual elected official or their assistant, maybe a legislative assistant or a county worker, you want to have a good relationship with that person too, because they really are the gatekeeper. Once you're in the meeting, keep it simple, just like we talked about. Share those stories, educate and explain, and make that ask for the arts. When you're doing so, keep in mind that you want to be inclusive. You want to talk about how the arts can affect everyone, and this is not a partisan issue at all. That this is that the arts are good for all the citizens of your community, and that everybody should be supported, and that this is good for the greater community. Also, stay positive. You might find yourself disagreeing with your elected official. That's okay. You can agree to disagree, perhaps agree to have the conversation later, but do try and stay positive and not let that become a confrontational setting. And certainly, check out the Remote Connections Toolkit at artsnc.org for some more tips about having that conversation at over either a Zoom call or a video call or a conference call. We give you some tips there. Also, gratitude is always the best attitude. Never forget to thank your official. Certainly on the way out the door, thanking for them for their time and service, but a handwritten note is always best, just like Grandma always said, because it's really nice to get that handwritten note. Your legislator is going to see it. They'll appreciate it. It might sit on the desk, particularly if it's a pretty card for a few weeks. And it really is going to leave more of an impression. Letters are great because everybody likes to get the mail. It might not spend spend quite as much time on the desk, but it will, it is a physical representation of your gratitude for their time and service. Emails are certainly better than nothing, but emails can also work great as a follow up in conjunction, say, with a handwritten note. If you want to just kind of touch on the points of the conversation that you had and maybe provide some links or attachments to other resources for that official. And finally, continue to build that relationship, because this is not something that you're going to, the work doesn't end after one meeting. And when you're building relationship, you have to stay in touch just like any of your friends, and treat them like a friend, and they'll become one. That's how we build a relationship. So always be friendly and always have a great amount of gratitude. Stay informed on their issues. Certainly you're going to know your arts issues, and that's a good thing to stay update on those so that you can become a resource for that elected official. But if they're really focused on transportation, know what's going on in their going on with transportation. Maybe know how the arts intersects with transportation in your district so that you can find a way to connect with them at a deeper level. And always, 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 I know I say this a lot, but I can never say it too much. Have the attitude of gratitude, because being grateful is never a bad way to build a relationship. Because these elected officials they don't make a ton of money being an elected official. This is something that they do as a public service, and it really is key that you show gratitude as you're having these meetings, and that they're giving of their time. So to wrap up, a quick question. We're going to see, are you up for the arts? So first thing, sign up. Make sure that you are signed up for Arts North Carolina's email list. This is the best way to receive updates on all of the issues that are impacting the arts and arts education. And also, this is how we send out calls to action, so you know when to engage in advocacy when the time is right. Additionally, join up for the arts. Become an Arts NC member. Our individual memberships start at $25, and our organization memberships start as low as $70, and then they're on a scale with rates based on the budget size of organizations as businesses. Businesses can also choose to be a sponsor of Arts Day or endorse us as a for-profit business partner. And finally, in the join up, get that creative state plate and rev up your ride. You can see it's a colorful way to show everybody that you support the arts. It's also a really great way to find your car in a crowded parking lot. You can find out more at thecreativestate.org. It'll take you 5 minutes, your registration and a credit card, and 2 weeks later, you'll get that get that plate, excuse me, and you'll be able to show off to everyone how much you support the arts. And then you just pay that $30 every year with your registration, making sure that we've got that professional presence at the General Assembly every year. And then do the work, right? You got to speak up for the arts. So that's answering those calls to action when they come out, taking those meetings, talking about why the arts matter to you, not just to elected officials, but to everybody in your community. So you're kind of building an awareness of why these issues are important, and meeting up with those elected officials, right? You've got to engage. You've got to build those relationships. So you got to speak up and meet up to make this work. And also show up to Arts Day 2021 on March 22nd and 24th. This is a really great way for the arts community to come together and work with the North Carolina General Assembly to show them the value of the arts and arts education in our state. So thank you, everybody, for checking out Arts Advocacy 101. I want to thank all of our Arts Day 21 sponsors who are actually sponsors of Arts North Carolina all year long, particularly our champion sponsors, Artists Thrive, Fayetteville Cumberland County Arts Council, Blumenthal Performing Arts Center. I really can't overstate how much the sponsorship dollars that we receive help to support and enable the work that we do all year. So big thank you to our sponsors. Thank you all so much for watching Advocacy 101.